Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. We are diving into some excerpts today from Yuki Ichikawa's ro.pdf, and hopefully we can all glean some really fantastic advice on how to upgrade our information game. This guy built a YouTube channel with over 120 million views, so he must be doing something right. She shares insights on how to gather information and present it effectively, so let's see what we can find.
You know, what I find so interesting about his approach is that he really starts with a fundamental mindset shift. He compares gathering information to a sushi chef sourcing fish. It's about getting that freshest fish because like the quality of your input determines the quality of the output, right?
Yeah, I love that analogy. It's so true. We need to be careful, choosy even, about where we get our information from, especially these days when there's just so much misinformation swirling around out there. But how do we actually avoid that bad information? How do we become, like, informed infovores?
Well, he really emphasizes that clarity of purpose is absolutely key. He goes so far as to use the example of Yoshida Shoin, who was a historical figure. This guy actually risked his life to gather information overseas. It's like his dedication to his mission really just highlights that importance of purpose when we do our research.
So it's not just about reading a lot or taking in a lot of information. It's about being really directed, purposeful. That makes sense. But, personally, I find myself jumping around a lot. I'm working on different projects, and I have a bunch of different interests. How do I keep that focus when I'm being pulled in so many different directions?
That's interesting because Ikawa actually built that huge YouTube channel all by himself. He was a solo act. So that kind of highlights that, individual concentrated effort can really, really make a difference. One thing that she recommends is visualizing the end result, like really picturing what you want to achieve and using that as your guide as you go and gather information.
It's like having a mental filter, right? You're going to be more likely to see and remember the information that will help you reach your goal. But realistically, none of us can be on all the time. Do we have to be constantly absorbing information to be effective?
Actually, he surprised me on this. He actually thinks that taking breaks is a really good thing. It lets the information sink in, right? It lets your brain kind of subconsciously work on it. That's actually how a lot of those aha moments come to be.
So it's as much about giving yourself space to process as it is about that input in the first place, which kind of brings up the question of how we decide what's even worth processing. What's worth our time and energy to even take in.
He breaks it down into three main types. So there's firsthand, straight from the source. Then there's secondhand, which is like media reports. And then you got third hand, which is basically someone's interpretation of what was reported. He really highlights how important it is to try to identify and use those firsthand sources whenever we can.
Absolutely. Of course, we all know that even firsthand accounts can be skewed, right? There's always that potential for bias. How do we sort through that, especially when we are looking into complex or controversial topics?
Well, he has a really interesting multifaceted approach. He encourages us to really analyze individual voices, even within like a larger media outlet, right?
Yeah.
He provides a framework for how to assess those potential biases. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, this is conservative or this is liberal, right? You really look at those underlying motivations.
So it's all about thinking critically, right? Not just accepting things at face value. But what about when we can't get those firsthand sources? What do we do when that information just isn't available?
He calls it the puzzle piece approach. It's about gathering as many different pieces of evidence as you can to form a more complete picture, like a puzzle, right? He actually uses the example of uncovering some hidden truths about a financial report, and he did this by bringing in lots of different sources. It was really fascinating.
Yeah. It's like being an investigator, right? You have to look at all the clues and piece things together. Speaking of organizing, I was so fascinated by his personal system. He calls it his electronic library, which is basically this gigantic collection of bookmarks categorized by topic, constantly being updated. Like, wow, this guy is serious about organization.
It's more than just bookmarking, though. It's about being able to find what you need quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
Having your trusted sources at your fingertips can really save a lot of time and keep you from falling down those internet rabbit holes.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. But let's be real, this guy sounds super organized. Building a system like that takes a lot of time and effort. I think a lot of us are already feeling pressed for time. So how do we even begin to integrate something like that into our lives?
He actually believes in making gathering information a daily habit. It doesn't have to be a huge undertaking. It could just be, 5 minutes in the morning. You just scan some headlines from your trusted sources, or maybe you listen to a podcast during your commute related to something that you're working on.
Right, yeah. You kind of look for those pockets of time in your day and use them intentionally. It's like you're turning passively scrolling into an opportunity to learn. There was something else that really stood out to me in his book. He really prefers to use English language sources for his work, and he directly addresses the fact that a lot of people find English to be a huge barrier, but he doesn't think it should be.
Yeah, he's a real pragmatist when it comes to learning languages.
Hmm.
He focuses on mastering basic grammar as opposed to just memorizing lists of words.
Which is interesting because I know I learned English by basically cramming vocabulary for tests. But he's saying that grammar is the foundation, it helps you actually understand how the language works.
Exactly. It's about building that long-term comprehension and not just those short-term memories. And he actually has a really unique vocabulary learning method. He calls it situation memory. It's where he associates new words with a specific context or scenario. Like maybe you remember a phrase from a movie or a TV show.
I love that. It's so much better than just staring at flashcards. He actually uses Twitter to help him too. He watches how people use English words in conversations, so it's like this really organic way to learn. But let's talk about his concept of attracting information. It was such a cool idea. He basically says you can become a magnet for the info that you need by using hypotheses and, well, yourself.
That's where his insight goes far beyond just techniques, right? He's getting into how we actually learn as people. Formulating hypotheses, even if they're very simple, can guide our research, and that helps us to really focus on what's relevant.
So we are being active, right? We're not just taking information in. We are going out and looking for what will prove or disprove our assumptions. Okay, so how do we decide what hypotheses are actually worth pursuing? How do we know where to start?
This is where his focus on intellectual honesty comes into play. He really stresses how important it is that we acknowledge what we don't know. Being honest about our knowledge gaps can prevent us from making bad assumptions, and it pushes us to dig a little deeper.
He actually shares this great story about analyzing a financial report for his YouTube channel, and he really questioned all those accepted narratives. And, he challenged everything by using real evidence. And the result was a totally fresh perspective that his viewers really connected with. It's like he's training himself to see patterns and connect things that other people just don't see.
Absolutely. And you know what? He recommends some pretty unusual activities to help develop this skill. He suggests things like reading novels and watching TV dramas.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me that watching TV is going to make me a better researcher? I love that.
Well, think about it. You're watching a story, and you are trying to figure out what is going to happen. You're analyzing character motivations, trying to predict what will happen next, and you're putting all the pieces together. And those are the same skills that we need when we are out in the world and trying to understand all of the information that's thrown at us.
I'm seeing it. It's like mental cross-training for gathering information. I love it.
Oh, and he actually takes it even further. He says you should try to identify what he calls forecasters. These are people who have a track record of correctly predicting things. By looking at how these people think and work, you can really refine your own skills in terms of building hypotheses.
That's brilliant. Okay, so we've been talking about how to be more discerning about what we take in. But how do we shift gears? How do we go from taking information in to actually putting it back out there? How do we communicate effectively?
He really emphasizes the importance of using data. Hard facts over just opinions. It really makes your argument much stronger, and people are more likely to believe you. He actually recommends a ratio, 95% data, 5% opinion.
That's like you're building a case, right? You're providing evidence, not just sharing feelings. But how do we know if what we are doing is actually working? How do we make sure that we're always getting better at communicating?
Okay, this is where he talks about something he calls one-person review sessions, which is basically regularly scheduled self-reflection. You take time to really think about what you did, what you decided, how things worked out, and you're constantly looking for ways to get better.
You're holding yourself accountable. I like that.
He even does this with his YouTube videos. He watches them back, but he does it from a completely neutral perspective.
Yeah.
So he can really be objective and see what he could improve on.
Oh, he actually tells a story about how he completely missed a super important piece of information in one of his videos. And, people called him out on it. They were harsh.
He didn't get defensive. He actually used that as a way to learn and grow. He adjusted his approach. It's a good reminder that even when feedback isn't fun, it can be really, really valuable.
Totally. You have to admit when you mess up, right?
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground already in this first part of our deep dive into Ikawa's ideas.
Yeah, we've explored how to be really smart about the information we choose, how to hone our focus, and even how to use some unconventional methods to improve our skills.
Before we move on, I just want to take a minute and let everything sink in a little bit. Think about what really spoke to you so far.
Did anything surprise you?
Or maybe challenge some of the assumptions that you've been holding about how we take in information.
Take a second, think about it. We'll come back in just a bit to dig even deeper into these strategies. So, welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we asked you to consider what really resonated with you from the first part of our exploration of Ikawa's ideas and strategies. What stood out?
Well, I think what really struck me was the idea that it's not just about, consuming more, taking in more information, but it's about being more aware of how we consume it. I never really thought about how analyzing characters in a novel, a fictional character, could actually help me be a better researcher. But it makes total sense when you think of it as practice for your brain. Like you're training your brain to think critically.
That's actually one of the things that I find so fascinating about Ikawa's work. He encourages us to kind of make these connections between things that might seem completely different. Like he shows us how strengthening a skill, like analyzing a character's motivation, can actually have some pretty amazing benefits in a totally different area of our lives, like how to gather information better.
Totally. It's like cross-training for your brain. But speaking of unexpected connections, I was super intrigued by how much Akawa emphasizes the importance of output as a part of, effectively gathering information.
It's almost like the opposite of what you think, right? You would think it's all about taking in, absorbing as much as you can. But he's actually saying that it's when you try to express what you've learned, whether you're writing it, speaking it, or even creating something, tangible, that you really deepen your understanding.
It's true. You're kind of forcing yourself to solidify those connections in your brain when you have to actually pull that information back out and use it. He also goes on to talk about how when you translate information, especially from English, and you share that with a bigger audience, it can really benefit society as a whole.
That's such a powerful idea. When we can break out of our little bubbles and actually expose ourselves to lots of different perspectives, we not only help ourselves understand more, but we actually contribute to a world that is more informed and connected. But let's shift gears a bit. One part of Ikawa's book that some people might find kind of overwhelming is his daily routine. The guy is so disciplined, he gets up at 5 a.m. every day. And that's when he starts his information gathering process.
Okay, yeah. Full disclosure, the 5 a.m. thing is not for me. But I can definitely see how that plays into his emphasis on habits. By setting up a really consistent routine, he's basically making a crucial part of his work automatic, which frees up his brain to focus on the bigger stuff.
It's not just about getting up early, though. He has a system, like a framework for how he chooses what to focus on. Like when he picks topics for his YouTube videos, he actually has two main criteria. First, the topic has to move him emotionally.
I love that. It really speaks to the importance of being passionate about what you do, right? If you're not genuinely interested in what you're talking about or sharing, people are going to be able to tell.
Absolutely. And his second criteria is whether he believes the information is something that everyone should know. Like he actually pictures specific people in his life and thinks about whether or not the information would actually be helpful or valuable to them.
It's like he's always filtering all the information that's coming at him. He's asking himself, is this worth sharing? Will this actually make a difference for someone? And it just blew me away. He films all of his YouTube videos in one take, usually at night, and with no editing.
I know, it sounds crazy hard. But I kind of get it. By setting up these limitations for himself, it forces him to make a decision and stick with it. He can't get stuck in the trap of trying to make things perfect.
Right. It forces him to be present, to focus, and to be really decisive. And that's a theme we see over and over, right? That purpose, focus, and efficiency. He's not wasting time on anything that's not helping him get to his goals. But even when you have a really structured routine, you still need time to recharge, right? So how does he deal with breaks and downtime?
He actually builds in little breaks all throughout his day. He'll step away from his computer and, I don't know, look up at the sky or maybe do a little meditation.
It's a good reminder, right? You don't have to be on all the time. Finding that rhythm that works for you so you have time to focus and time to rest is really key.
He's also a really big believer in getting enough sleep. He's convinced that when you sacrifice sleep, you're actually hurting your productivity, even if you feel like you're getting more done in the moment.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. You pull an all-nighter to get something done, and then the quality of the work just suffers. It's all about that balance, right? Pushing yourself, but knowing when you need to step back and recharge.
Totally. And he actually incorporates mindfulness practices, like meditation, into his routine. He does it both in the morning and at night. It helps him clear his head and then approach his work with this sense of calm and focus.
It's so cool to see how these little habits, these tiny things that might seem insignificant, can actually have a huge impact on how we process information and communicate with other people.
One thing I really admire about Ikawa's whole approach is that he never stops trying to improve. He's all about those daily one-person review sessions to really analyze what you did and how you made decisions.
It's about taking responsibility, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at what worked and what didn't, and you're not afraid to be honest with yourself.
And he does this with his YouTube videos too. He watches them back, but he does it like he doesn't even know himself. It's like he's looking at someone else's work so he can be completely objective and see what needs to be improved.
He actually talks about this time when he totally missed something really important in one of his videos. He left out some crucial information, and people let him have it in the comments.
But you know what? He didn't get all defensive about it. He took it as a learning experience and actually changed the way he did things, which, it's tough, right? It's hard to take criticism, but it can be such a valuable tool.
For sure. Sometimes you just have to admit you're wrong. So speaking of presenting information, Ikawa also talks about how important it is to use data over just your own opinions if you really want to get your point across.
He thinks that data is way more convincing, especially when you're trying to persuade people who might not agree with you. He recommends aiming for a 95% data to 5% opinion ratio.
It makes your argument so much stronger. He actually learned this the hard way when he was working at a publishing house early on in his career. His book proposals kept getting rejected because they didn't have enough data to back them up.
He realized that even the best ideas, the most brilliant ideas, need real evidence if you want people to take you seriously.
And he stresses how important it is to come up with a really clear thesis statement before you start doing all that research. It's like having a roadmap, right? It keeps you on track and helps you avoid getting lost in all of the information out there.
He actually compares it to how a lawyer builds a case. You need to have a really strong opening statement, really good evidence to back it up, and a clear conclusion if you want to persuade the jury, or in this case, your audience.
It's about making your argument easy to follow, right? It needs to be logical, persuasive. But what happens when we don't know what to do? What about when we don't have all the information? How do we make a decision then?
Okay, so this is where Ikawa introduces a concept that he calls options. And it's basically a way to deal with uncertainty. And it helps you to avoid getting stuck in that trap of overthinking everything. He uses the example of a hairstylist who is talking to a client who wants their hair 2 centimeters shorter.
Oh, yeah, right. Because that could mean a million different things to different people.
Exactly. So instead of just assuming, what the client wants, the stylist would show them pictures or descriptions, different options. And that helps the client to actually say what they're looking for.
That is such a smart strategy. It can really prevent miscommunication and make sure everyone is on the same page.
And he uses this in his own work, too. When he's trying to figure out what his next YouTube video is going to be about, he actually comes up with 2 completely different options, just in case his first idea doesn't work out.
That's so smart. It keeps you flexible and avoids those creative blocks, right? He's very clear that these options should be very different from each other, not just, slightly different versions of the same thing.
Yeah, he compares it to choosing between Japanese food or Western food on an airplane, not between rare or well done. It's about having a bunch of different possibilities in your back pocket.
Right, you're giving yourself options, expanding your mental toolkit so you're ready for anything.
Exactly. He believes you can use this idea of options in every part of your life, making decisions, solving problems, coming up with new ideas.
It's a totally new way of thinking, right? It helps you deal with complexity and all the uncertainty in the world. So, speaking of expanding our horizons, we should definitely spend a little more time on Ikawa's idea about using English language sources to get a wider range of information. He's not just talking about really academic stuff either, journals and technical documents and things like that. He thinks that even regular everyday stuff like news articles, social media posts, just online discussions, all of that can be really valuable.
It's true. He thinks that when we only rely on things that have been translated, we can actually miss out on some really important nuances. And sometimes, translations aren't perfect, so there's always that potential for bias.
When you engage with those original English sources, you're getting the information straight from the source. It's unfiltered, and it's often more up-to-date, too.
Right. A lot of times, information can get delayed in translation. By the time something gets translated and shared, it might already be old news. So, yeah, being able to understand English is definitely a huge advantage in the information age.
Totally agree. But let's be real, a lot of people find the idea of learning English to be super overwhelming. How does Aikawa approach this? How does he make language learning more accessible for people?
He really emphasizes that it doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming task.
Mm-hmm.
He says you should start with the basics, like grammar. He compares it to learning the rules of a game.
So true. Once you get the structure and how all the pieces fit together, it's way easier to learn new words and, actually use them.
He's also a big fan of what he calls situation memory. So instead of just trying to memorize lists of words, he says, connect those new words with a specific scenario. Like maybe think of a scene in a movie or something you saw on a TV show.
Oh, yeah. It's like you're creating this mental anchor that helps you remember. I love that.
He even uses Twitter to help him learn new words. He pays attention to how people use English words in their everyday conversations, and then he adds them to his own, mental dictionary.
It's like you're passively learning. You're just engaging in something you enjoy, and you're picking up new vocabulary along the way.
Totally. And he doesn't stop there. He actually suggests making your own flashcards. But instead of just writing down a single word, he says, copy entire paragraphs or articles that have the words you want to learn.
That's so much better. You're seeing how the words are actually used, so it's easier to remember them.
Absolutely. And you have to make sure that you actually review those flashcards, even just for like 5 minutes a day. It really helps to solidify what you've learned.
It's about turning it into a habit. You just make language learning a part of your everyday life.
And he stresses that you should always use a good dictionary. Don't just assume that you know what a word means. Even words that seem familiar can have these little nuances that you might not be aware of.
He's all about being really precise and deliberate with language, right? Every time you come across a new word, it's a chance to really learn and grow. But what about people who are just starting out? Who feel totally overwhelmed by the idea of learning English? What can they do? Where do they even begin?
Ikawa suggests starting small, baby steps.
Yeah.
Maybe start by following some English language Twitter accounts that share things you're already interested in.
It's a really good way to start getting used to seeing the language without feeling like there's a ton of pressure.
Right. And he says maybe even set up a separate Twitter account just for following English accounts. That way, you're not tempted to switch back to your native language.
It's like building your own little English world right there on your phone.
Exactly. And once you start feeling more comfortable reading those little bits of text, you can move on to reading, like news articles in English.
I love his idea about starting with publications that offer both English and your native language versions of their articles.
Right. That way you can skim the article in your native language so you already know what it's about, and then challenge yourself to read it again in English. You can use what you already know to help you understand.
It's like training wheels for learning English.
I like that. And he says, don't just read passively. Ask yourself how certain phrases or ideas would be expressed in English.
You're really making it an active learning experience, right? You're thinking about the language, making connections, and really trying to understand.
Exactly. And he actually has some great tips on how to read English news articles more efficiently. Unlike some other types of writing, English news articles tend to tell you the main point right at the beginning. So he says if you're really pressed for time, just focus on the headline, the subheadline, and maybe the first couple of paragraphs.
So you're getting the gist of it, right, without having to read the whole thing.
Right. You might miss a few of the finer points, but you'll get the main idea. And speaking of getting your point across, we have to go back to Ikawa's idea about how output can actually help you learn a language better.
He suggests actively trying to translate things you've read or learned from English and then sharing those with other people, whether you're writing, speaking, making videos, whatever.
It's a fantastic way to solidify what you've learned and also make a real contribution to your community.
He actually believes that when we do this, translate information and share it, we're actually helping to break down language barriers and bring people closer together.
What a beautiful thought, right? Learning a new language is about so much more than just our own personal growth. It's about empowering yourself to connect with other people, to share different ideas and perspectives.
We have covered so much ground today in our deep dive into Ikawa's strategies, and I feel like I have learned so much. From building that electronic library to those really interesting one-person review sessions, there's so much we can take away from this.
It really is amazing. I mean, we've talked about how to focus better, how to leverage all these different learning methods, both, traditional and some really unusual ones, and how being able to understand English can open up so many more possibilities.
What I find so inspiring about his approach is that he's not just giving us a bunch of techniques. He's helping us to develop a whole new way of thinking about learning. Like, he wants us to be always growing and improving.
Right, yeah. He
Yeah.
really wants us to be active participants, not just passive.
Mhm.
Question everything. Be okay with not knowing. And always look for those opportunities to expand our understanding of the world.
It all comes back to our goals, right? Like, we need to be clear about why we're doing something and then use that to guide us as we gather information.
Absolutely. It's not about just consuming. It's about seeking out what will really help us move forward. We're not just trying to learn trivia. We're trying to build a foundation for action.
And I love how Ikawa really emphasizes the idea that all of our skills are connected. Like, he showed us how being able to, I don't know, analyze a story, like a fictional story, can actually help us in a totally different area of our lives, like when we are making decisions or trying to understand complex information.
Yeah. It's like everything we learn builds upon itself, and we can use those skills in so many different ways. We just have to be open to that.
And we can't forget about that idea of output. Like, Ikawa reminds us that when we actually share what we've learned, when we put it out there, whether we write it down or talk about it or, even create something with it, that actually makes those connections in our brain even stronger.
It's like when you explain something to someone else, you really have to understand it yourself first. And then, when we share what we've learned with others, we're not just like showing off. We're actually helping to make the world a little bit smarter.
So as we wrap things up, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. What's one tiny thing you can do today to become a better consumer of information and a better communicator?
Maybe you could commit to spending just 5 minutes each morning, just looking at some headlines from your trusted sources. Or maybe try out Ikawa's situation memory technique to learn a new English word today.
Whatever it is, just remember, even small actions, when you do them consistently, can really add up over time. Like Ikawa says, becoming a master at, taking in information and then sharing it, it's not something that happens overnight. It's a journey.
Absolutely. It's about staying curious, never stopping learning, and, always looking for those opportunities to improve our skills and our understanding.
It's been so fun to explore these ideas with you today. Gathering information and being able to share it effectively can have such a huge impact on our lives, our communities, the world, really. So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep sharing what you learn.
We will be back with another deep dive soon. Until then, stay curious and keep on learning.